Here in my garage, just bought this new Lamborghini. In fact, I've been playing on it for the past 14 years or so. However, what I like a lot more than materialistic things is innovation. In fact, I'm proud to announce that for the past year or so, I've been playing on this weird-looking piano. In this video, I would like to discuss 3 things. First of all, how I got my hands on this. Second, the pros and cons of playing on it. And thirdly, how you might be able to tell whether this could be interesting for you. It happened ages ago, in the before times, when I had this genius idea. Here, let me show you. On the piano, most of the times, keys are placed pretty self-explanatory. For every half step, we kind of just move diagonally up or diagonally down. However, between B and C, there's just a hole between the keys, where we have to move horizontally, even though these 2 keys are just a half step apart. The same thing repeats between E and F, where again we kind of interrupt this nice placement of keys to perform an irregular movement. Why is that? Well, it is mostly due to historical reasons according to my hobby research. As I understand it, the white keys were the base of the traditional keyboards, those of course not being traditional pianos, but organ-type instruments. Over time, people experimented, adding new keys, those being the black keys, doing funky stuff like trying out split black keys, and eventually settling on our conventional piano design, where the original base still is the white keys, and everything else that was kind of crammed into it is now on top, the black keys. This is why our current piano doesn't seem to have that consistent of a structure. That being said, there's great benefit to having our piano structured the way it is. First benefit is that it's very easy for beginners, it's very accessible. You can just tell them, well, play the white keys and it'll sound fine. The second reason is that the conventional piano actually aligns perfectly with our notation system. In our notation you have the regular, unmodified, easy notes, and those are the easy keys to reach on the piano. On the other hand, you have the special, more difficult notes that you get by modifying regular notes. The same thing is true for the piano, where you modify a white key to go to a special, more difficult note. These advantages are pretty neat for the conventional piano. However, let's just put them aside for a moment, we'll come back to them, and look at another way in which the piano might be structured. This is what I came up with. My plan was to keep the up and down movement going for every single half step, not skipping any half steps, and thus not creating any empty space between the white keys. This design would have had 2 major advantages. First, due to the new design filling up the holes between E and F and B and C, we actually position the keys more effectively. Thus, even when keeping the front of the white keys the same width, the overall octave grows shorter. Actually, the whole keyboard grows shorter. If you've got small hands, you may now no longer need to fight your body to play insane pieces from Rachmaninoff or similar composers. If you've already got large hands, you now are able to play inhumanly large intervals. Secondly, this design has the advantage of making chords and scales and intervals in general much more consistent. I won't go into much detail, but let me give you a brief overview. Every major scale is built the same way. It's always 2 whole steps, 1 half step, 3 whole steps, and 1 half step. No matter what key it is in. However, when we try to map this nice and consistent system onto the conventional piano, we suddenly see that the major scale for every key suddenly results in a different shape you have to play. This means that this nice and consistent pattern gets morphed into an inconsistent shape pattern when applied to the inconsistent structure of the conventional piano. When we now instead look at the isomorphic piano, the newly invented piano, we see a different pattern emerging. Mapping the nice and consistent structure of the major scale onto that piano results in somewhat consistent patterns. It still isn't perfect because you have two different shapes for the major scale. However, it's much better than the conventional piano. This newfound consistency might be able to save people tons of practice time, because you now might not have to practice 12 different scales, making your practice times ideally about a sixth. So, now that I had this amazing idea, what I did next was nothing. I kind of got distracted by life, then Corona happened, and my new project was trying to not go insane. I mostly succeeded. However, now after 3 years, I was finally ready to again start working on this new amazing piano. I talked to people, and what those people said was, have you tried Googling it? So I did. I discovered that someone had been much faster than I had been. Over 100 years ago, a Hungarian pianist, technician and inventor actually worked on something similar. His name was Paul von Jankó, and building on previous ideas on how to improve the piano, he arrived at something that was from then on called the Jankó Piano. This is what it looks like. So now, you're probably thinking one of two things. First, where's my heart attack medication? Or second, what is this? What is this? This looks nothing like the design we just discussed. This is actually a chessboard, not a piano. And I get your thought. Let me quickly show you how we can easily transform the previous piano to this new invention. First, we start out with our isomorphic piano. Next, we change the key shapes. This is just for fun at the moment, but it enables us to easily perform the next step, which is that we notice a flaw in this isomorphic piano. Chord shapes are more standardized than on the conventional piano, but there are still two different chord shapes that we need to learn. Scales that start at the top row are not able to go up any further. Therefore, they need to go down, therefore creating a new kind of shape. However, if we now were to duplicate the bottom row and move it to the top, we can now play the same scale shape for every single key, provided that we try to start as low as possible. Now, the last step in creating the heart attack Jankó Piano is to just duplicate another two rows. This is mostly for ergonomic reasons, because it's nice to play certain scales and chords in multiple rows. Keep in mind that this new idea still doesn't add any new notes or anything of that nature. The new rows are actually just duplicates of the bottom two rows to make playing easier and make scales and chords more consistent. So, now that I had found out about this even better version, I decided to work on it. I thought about it, I sketched, I designed 3D models, I 3D printed. I even created small prototypes for single keys. My plan was to create a converter from the conventional piano to a Jankó piano, which was very complicated in practice. Even though I had built so many prototypes, issues kept coming up, and whenever I succeeded in fixing one of these issues, a new one came up and forced me to revisit all my plans. It was kind of frustrating, and I was close to just stopping developing this altogether. This is when something happened that changed my plans for all of the project altogether. I made one last plan. I wanted to try out a real Jankó piano to see whether it was even worth it to put all this effort into building this. I found a piano manufacturer in Germany in some tiny village that, to my knowledge, was one of the very few piano manufacturers in the world that had built a actual physical Jankó piano. I called him, we scheduled a day where I could meet him, and eventually that day came. I traveled to Germany and was able to try out the Jankó piano. Once I was there, I was finally able to try out this piano for about 4 hours. I filmed as many videos as I could using this weird setup where I had this jacket. I put in my phone like this, started to record, and played, and kind of hoped that I was actually filming my hands. Playing the Jankó piano there was a strange mix of kind of mind melting, where your concentration just has to be fully there to do anything, and you get tired extremely easily. And it's very easy to accidentally use the old intervals you're used to play octaves, for example. At the same time, it surprised me how easy it was to relearn certain tunes that I had learned long ago on the traditional piano. This worked the best when I actually had a mental image of the theory behind the music I was trying to play. This part was very motivating to me, and it showed me that you could actually play on this thing. It might actually be interesting and worthwhile trying out. I went back home and decided to do things differently. I didn't care anymore about building the perfect converter that would make the keys feel perfect and make the piano smaller and allow you to put it on any piano. I just wanted a simple, quick overlay that I could just try out to see whether this piano was actually worth sticking to. So, what I did is I made a new design, and within about a month of non-stop working on it and printing, I finally did what I was unable to do the months, the years beforehand. I finally was able to create my own Jankó piano. Before we are able to talk about whether this might be something for you specifically, let me tell you about the pros I experienced, the cons, and the mixed aspects and misconceptions about playing on a Jankó piano. I will do my best to be as unbiased as possible, just telling you the straight facts as I know them. The last year I mostly played in 3 settings: accompanying a choir, improvisation at home, and being part of a jazz band. First of all, accompanying people is such a treat. This is especially true when you're at the beginner to intermediate level, where you're not yet forced to think about tons of inversions all the time. It is very simple to just find the root note, plop down the shape for major 7th chord, and just move on with your day. In fact, after playing on this piano for about 1 year, I feel more confident in accompanying a choir, for example, than on the traditional piano. You can see the same thing when playing certain styles of music. Here's an example from a boogie, where you have a lick, and you can just use the exact same lick in root position, in 4th position, and in 5th position. an amazing feeling when you realize that one musical concept actually translates to one movement, no matter what key you're in. The second point is also related to the consistency of shapes, of intervals, of chords, of scales. There is this great YouTube video.
Auch, dass die Bausteine überhaupt bewusst werden. Es ist immer gleich Gehörbildung, wenn ich übe. Aha, so greift sich also ein Dominant-Septakkord. Und was habe ich hier? Das Gleiche. Es ist wieder ein Dominant-Septakkord. Das kriegt man auf der Normaltastatur gar nicht so leicht mit. Und wieder ein Dominant-Septakkord.
In my personal experience, I can confirm what he says. You start recognizing that this is a major 7th chord. And then while playing, even if you hadn't noticed beforehand, you suddenly start realizing that, oh, that's the thing. It is really strange, but you just start noticing patterns. I used to think that in 7th chords, the 7 just is a half step down from the octave of the root note. However, while playing on the Jankó piano, I actually realized that the interval between the 3rd and the 7th is a tritone, and that this might be one of the reasons why 7th chords have this additional tension built into them. I never realized that on the traditional piano. Well, on the Jankó piano, I kind of just figured out that, whoa, yeah, that's a tritone. Interesting. Lastly, this aspect of noticing music theory actually permeates all of playing on the Jankó piano. In a certain way, it actually forces you to confront the music theory behind it. And I think that's a great pro about playing on the Jankó piano. That being said, let's go over to the cons. First, the most important con. It is a new instrument, and while you carry over some of your previous experience, and obviously all of your music theory, you still need to get more comfortable and get used to this new way of playing the piano. Similarly, you lose some of your repertoire. This mainly affects very difficult songs, where you're fully reliant on your muscle memory for running around. It has less of an impact for songs that you conceptually have memorized and where you are actually able to tell which keys you're supposed to be pressing. However, I would like to stress that this is not a completely new instrument when you're coming from the conventional piano. I'm certain that I was able to learn the Jankó piano much faster, simply because I had experience with the conventional piano. Contrast this to me learning the guitar or the violin. These would have been much more difficult than simply going from one type of piano to another type of piano. Second con. The logistics of playing on the Jankó piano will always be more difficult than the conventional piano. On the conventional piano, you can just buy one, play it at home, go anywhere else, and there likely will be a piano ready for you. On the Jankó piano, you do not have this privilege. So what options do you have? First of all, you can get a conventional piano that was modified to have Jankó piano keys. This is super nice for playing, with the downside that you'll only ever be able to play at home. Second, you can get an electric piano, fitted with Janko keys, and carry it around wherever you want to go. This is the cheaper option, it's the more mobile and practical option, but it forces you to carry the thing wherever you go. This is the option I chose, and I would make that decision again, but it is something to keep in mind. And on the bright side, you do suddenly develop a certain intense empathy for double bass players. The third con is actually a big pro of the conventional piano compared to any other instrument. And that is that it's a perfect representation of our sheet music. This is not the case for the Jankó piano, where coloring still is present, but the positioning of the notes are no longer perfectly representative of what the sheet music tells us. And while this is a pro of the conventional piano, I do not think this is a deal breaker. The reason for this is that any other musician has to deal with this as well. Anyone playing the guitar, playing the violin, playing the double bass, playing the flute, all of them have to deal with the fact that their instrument isn't a perfect representation of our notation system. All of those people seem to be doing quite fine. And therefore, I think that while this is a con of the Jankó piano, it is something that can be overcome and has been overcome millions of times. After talking about the pros and the cons of the Jankó piano, I would now like to briefly touch on the mixed aspects and the misconceptions of playing on it. First, ergonomics and comfortability. I think many people believe that the Jankó piano always is more ergonomic than the traditional piano. In my opinion, most of the time it does feel more ergonomic. However, sometimes you do get forced into some uncomfortable fingering patterns. I think that the Jankó piano might be more comfortable in 40% of the cases. Its ergonomics might be equal in another 40%. And in the remaining 20% of the cases, it's a bit less comfortable than the conventional piano. The second mixed aspect is the ease of playing any of the 12 scales. The conventional piano has a certain prioritization of keys. In my opinion, it's an instrument that's clearly optimized for playing in C major and related scales, such as F major or G major. This makes it so that on the conventional piano, if you stick to those keys, playing whatever you want to play will be much easier. Other scales are more difficult, and you do have to learn tons of different patterns. However, it is a certain advantage to have keys for which your instrument clearly is optimized for. As a comparison, you could say the same thing about the guitar, which according to my understanding is optimized for keys like G major, E major, A major. And without barré chords, somewhat struggles to play chords like B flat, E flat, stuff of that nature. Contrast these instruments that are optimized for certain keys to the Jankó piano, to an isomorphic keyboard, which does not prioritize any one key. This means that on the Jankó piano, you will never find a key that is as easy to play as C major on the classical piano. On one hand, this could be seen as a downside, especially for beginners that want to start out while having the instrument and their scale be as easy as possible. On the other hand, this is only the case because of one major advantage of the Jankó piano, which is that every single key is structured exactly the same way. This means that while on a conventional piano you have easier keys and more difficult keys, you have to learn 12 of them. On the Jankó piano, every single key is somewhat difficult, but you only ever have to learn one shape. If you play the conventional piano, here is how I would compare those two. On the conventional piano, I would say that the key that is closest in difficulty to any key on the Jankó piano is G flat major. Of course, this isn't the easiest key, but you only have to learn it once. As for the last mix aspect, on the conventional piano, especially when you're not playing any concert level pieces, but instead you're on the beginner to intermediate level. You usually just have to read the sheet music, find the appropriate key, press it. Easy. Especially at that level, even though it might be beneficial to you, you're not forced to think about what finger to use for each key and how to best move about. Of course, the Jankó piano has to be a little bit special and thus gives us the option where to press down the key. This is due to the duplicate rows as previously discussed. When starting to play the Jankó piano, you're confronted by this from the get-go. You immediately have to think about, if I go up, should I place the thumb down here? Should I put the thumb in the middle? Should I put the thumb on the top? you shouldn't put it at the top. The Jankó Piano forcing you to think about which option to press down, of course, requires more thinking than sitting at a conventional piano, dropping down your hand and pressing the key wherever your finger happens to fall. And while I have experienced and can understand that this might feel daunting at first, I think it actually is a good thing. This is because on the conventional piano, when hitting a certain level, you also have to start thinking about which fingers to use, where to place them to move about as smoothly as possible. The only difference is that the Jankó Piano starts training you in thinking this way much earlier. In fact, when coming back to the conventional piano after a while of playing on the Jankó Piano, I noticed that my intuitive thinking had been trained a lot. I suddenly was thinking about which fingers to use and how to proceed as smoothly as possible, even though previously I hadn't paid that aspect much thought. This was solely due to practicing on the Jankó Piano and learning the importance of correct finger positioning. 2 more thoughts on this particular issue. First, this does get easier. After some time, you will have acquired some intuitive sense of how to place your fingers. Second, through playing, you do realize that there are certain rules that you can follow that will make choosing what fingers to use much easier. And we'll go into those in a future video, which will be a Jankó Piano tutorial. To summarize, as with a couple of aspects, on the Jankó Piano, you are forced to think a little bit more about how to correctly play something. At the same time, this is a skill that you only have to learn once and which is greatly beneficial to you. I leave it up to you to make the decision whether you think this is something desirable or you want to go with the conventional piano flow of learning finger positioning at a later stage of your playing career. Now that we have compared playing on the Jankó Piano to playing on the conventional piano, how do you know whether you might want to try this out? Well, if we're being honest, if you made it that far into the video, you might have already made up your mind on whether this might be interesting for you. That being said, here's how I would go about making the decision whether to try out this piano. The Jankó Piano might be for you if you like the idea of its keys being placed in this nice and regular pattern, also called isomorphism. If you like the results of this aspect, such as consistent shapes, intervals, chords, and consistent scales across any key. If you're interested in rediscovering those scales and intervals and shapes during your regular musical playing, and thus possibly increasing the speed at which you learn music theory. And if you think that, depending on the construction of the piano, you might benefit from narrower octaves, giving you a wider hand range. On the other hand, the Jankó Piano might not be for you if you prefer the conventional piano's layout for any reason, if you're some kind of professional piano player that cannot afford a temporary dip in playing ability while switching pianos, or if, apart from the playing itself, you want an easier life. What do I mean by that? At the moment, you have a couple of options that all don't seem that great. You can either win a lottery or rob a bank and pay for your own upright Jankó Piano. On the other hand, you can download some DIY Jankó Piano kit that probably doesn't fit your piano that well because it was only designed for one particular kind of piano. Because I myself didn't see any great options out there, I just decided to make my own overlay. You can adapt it to any piano regarding like black key heights or key depletion, and it even is designed in a way where you can just pop off any of the key tops and put on any other key top, possibly turning your piano into a colorful, bright piano. This is what our next video will be about. Previous attempts at how people converted conventional pianos into Jankó pianos, how I did it, and how you might be able to do so too. Anyway, I hope this video provided value to you, and I wish you a nice day.